Tables and graphing. The student will generate a different representation of data given another representation of data, such as a table, graph, equation, or verbal description. Today we will be working with all of these. We've learned about equations and how to solve them. We've also learned about graphing and how to graph points. Today we're going to look at how we graph equations. Here we have the equation y equals x minus 3. And we're given a set of values for x. X equals -1, x equals 0, x equals 1, 2, 3. So if x were equal to -1, let's solve what y would equal. Y would equal x minus 3. And here our x value is -1. So we're going to substitute a -1 in for x. -1 minus 3 will give us a y value of -4. So when x is -1, y is -4. Now let's substitute 0. Again, we have y equals x minus 3. We'll substitute 0 for x, and 0 minus 3 gives us -3, so y will equal -3 when x is 0. We'll continue to do the same thing for each and every x value that is given. Each time we'll take 3 away from x. So here we have x is 1, x is 2, x is 3. 1 minus 3 will give us -2. 2 minus 3 will give us -1. And finally, 3 minus 3 will give us 0. So now we have a set of coordinates. When x is -1, y will be -4. When x is 0, y is -3. When x is 1, y is -2. When x is 2, y is -1. And finally, when x is 3, y is 0. Now with these ordered pairs, or these sets of points, we can go ahead and graph the equation y equals x minus 3. So here we have a graph, and we have our set of points that we determined in the previous slide. We have our x values and our y values. And now we are able to graph these points on the coordinate plane. So let's start with x is -1, y is -4. We know this is our y-axis and this one is our x-axis. So we're going to go to -1 on the x-axis. We know that this point is 0, 0. So -1 would be 1 back and then 4 down. So this will be our first point. Then we have another point at 0, -3. Now, when I marked the origin, I made it look like a point, so I should erase that. Then we have 1, -2. So we go over 1 on the x-axis and down -2 on the y-axis. Then we have 2 to the right and 1 down. And finally, 3 to the right and 0 down. So this would be the points that are given to us on the right in our table. And the equation y equals x minus 3 would be represented if we connected all of these dots and our line went endlessly in each direction. This line represents the equation y equals x minus 3. Now let's try another one. y equals 2x minus 3. Again, each time we're going to substitute a different x value so that we can come up with a set of x and y values to plot on the coordinate plane. So I'm just going to copy my equation down in each field, and then I'll substitute in my x values. So off to the left here, we're given several x values. We're going to substitute those x values into the equation to determine several points. So if x is equal to -2, we can solve for y, for -1, for 0, for 1.5, and for 2 1/2. So we have y equals, and 2 times -2 is -4, and -4 minus 3 will give us -7. Now for the next one. 2 times -1 is -2. -2 minus 3 will give us -5. 2 times 0 will give us 0. Minus 3 will give us -3. 2 times 1.5 will give us 3. Minus 3 will give us 0. And finally, 2 times 2 1/2 will give us 5. And 5 minus 3 will give us 2. So when x is -2, y will be -7. When x is -1, y will be -5. When x is 0, y would be -3. When x is 0, y would be, when x is 1.5, y would be 0. And when x is 2.5, y would be 2. Now let's take these points that we've determined and graph them. We have -7, -5, -3, 0, and 2. So we'll graph each one of these points. We'll start with the first one, -2, -7. So we're going to go back to 1, 2, and down 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Then we have -1, -5. So we go back 1 and down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 0 and -3. 1.5 and 0. So to go to 1.5, we'll go over one space and then half of a space. And then up 0, so that's where we'll land, right there. It's halfway between the 1 and the 2 because it says 1.5. Then we have 2.5 and 2. So we'll go 1, 2, and a half, and then up 1, 2. So again, we're right there in the middle in between. Now, when you do this, you should get a nice straight line with your points. If you don't, then that would indicate to you that you've made an error, because all of the equations that we'll be graphing at this point in time will be straight lines, or they are called linear equations, because the equation makes a straight line. Okay, so ours makes a nice straight line, and we'll go forever in each direction. There are values we didn't solve for, but you could estimate by looking at this line that, let's say, if x was 4, y would be about how much? Y would be approximately 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So they are useful for determining an endless set of data without actually having to solve for y every single time whenever you substitute in a different value for x. So it's a great way of displaying quite a bit of information. Now let's look at a table of points and determine which equation matches the table. This is set up in a multiple choice format, so what we will need to do is take one equation at a time and see if it makes a true statement. Now, in order for it to be true, each and every x value must be plugged into the equation, and each time we must get the value that is given for y. So let's start with answer choice A. We have y equals -2 times x plus 3. So -2 times our x value plus 3. What's our first x value? X values are right here, so our first one we'll use is 0. Now, -2 times 0 is 0, and 0 plus 3 is equal to 3. So when x is 0, y is equal to -3. I'm sorry, y is equal to 3. Here in the graph, it says that y is equal to -3 when x is 0. So this does not make a true statement. Therefore, A is not the correct answer. Let's try B. We have 4 times x minus 3. We'll substitute 0. 4 times 0 is 0, and 0 minus 3 is -3. So when we put 0 in for x, we get out a -3. And as you see here, that is what we should get. So this could be the right answer. In order for it to certainly be the right answer, we must complete checking the other points. So we'll have to substitute in a 1 and see if we get out a 1, as the chart indicates. So we have 4 minus 3 is 1. So it does match. But still, we don't know if it's the right answer until we check the final point. So finally, we will check 2. 4 times 2 is 8, and 8 minus 3 is equal to 5. Once again, we have a match. So, because all 3 points match, when we put in the x value, we do see that the y value matches. Answer choice B will be correct. Now this one, you may look at it and say, oh no, this one has fractions, it's so hard. That's not the case. Let's start with the easiest of the points, which would be when x is equal to 2 and y is equal to 5. That will minimize the number of fractions that we have to work with. So we'll start with answer choice A. Y is equal to 3 times x minus 2 and 1/2. So we have 3 times 2 for x minus 2.5. We know that 3 times 2 is 6, and if we take 2.5 away from 6, will we end up with 5? No. Logic and common sense tell us that if we take half of something away from a whole number, we will end up with an answer that also has a half in it. Therefore, we know that answer choice A is not logical. So we can go ahead and determine that's not the right answer, and we can move on. Let's try answer choice B. 2 equals 2 1/2 times x. So y equals 2 1/2. And for x, again, we'll use the 2. Now we know that 2 1/2 is 2.5. And 2.5 times 2 will give us 5. If you didn't know it, you can do it very quickly and simply in decimal form, and you will see y is equal to 5. Okay, now we did get a match here. Okay, so this could be our answer. You have a choice now how you can go about doing this. Either you can continue by checking to see if 1 and 3, when substituted for x, will yield 2 1/2 and 7 1/2, or you can check and see if C and D can be eliminated. It's your choice. Let's go ahead and complete checking answer choice B and see if it's right. It's always good to get practice with fractions. So we have 2 1/2 times x. This time for x, we'll put in the 1. And we'll have y equals 2 1/2 times 1. And 1 times anything is simply 2 1/2. And we'll see once again that yes, it does match. When we put in 1 for x, we get out y is 2 1/2. And finally, we'll substitute 3 for x. So we have 2 1/2 times 3. Again, we'll convert 2 1/2 to a decimal, and 2 1/2 times 3 will in fact give us 7 1/2, or 7.5. 7 1/2 and 7.5 are of course equivalent. So again, we find that answer choice B is the correct answer. Now we're going to look at a different setup where we're given the equation and we're asked which set of points match. In our previous two examples, we were given the points and we were asked which equation matches. So here we'll work with the same equation each and every time, and we'll swap out different points. Alright, so which value is x? The first one or the second one? Remember, they're in alphabetical order, so the first value is x and the second value is y. So will I get the y value of 0 when I put in the x value of -2? Let's find out. 2 times -2 is -4, and -4 minus 4 is -8. No, we should have gotten 0 if this was going to be true, and we got -8. So it is not answer choice A. Let's try the next one. Here we'll put in a -6 for the x value. And determine if it is true. 2 times -6. A positive times a negative is a negative. 2 times 6 is 12. -12 minus 4 is -16. We were not supposed to get -16 for y. We should have gotten an 8 if answer choice B was correct, and therefore answer choice B is not correct. We'll move on now to answer choice C. In answer choice C, x is equal to 3. And if answer choice C is correct, then y value will equal 2. So let's see what we get. 2 times 3 is 6, and 6 minus 4 is 2. So in fact, when we put in 3 for the x value, we did get out 2 for the y value. So this one is a match. Our answer is C. here's another example that's the same as the one we just did. I'd like for you to try this on your own, pause the video, and then look at the solution to see if you did it correctly. Okay, whenever we plug in or substitute the values for C, which are 1 for X and we get out an answer of 5, which means that yes, answer choice C is correct. When X is 1, Y is equal to 5. If you said answer choice C, good job. You got it right. This one's a little bit different. It involves a little bit more work because this time there's a number on the side of Y, which means that we'll have to do a little bit more math to solve for Y. In fact, we'll go ahead and substitute in both the X values and the Y values into this equation in order to determine if it is true. Now when you look at your X values, you'll see that 3 of them are -2. So if we substitute in the -2 and the Y is equal to 3, we know it's A. If it's equal to -2, we know it's B. And if it's equal to -3, we know it's C. Now if none of those are true, then we'll put in a -3 for X, and then we should get out a -2 if the other 3 did not work. So let's see. We have 4 times Y equals 5 times X plus 2. So for X, we'll start with -2. And I'd like to go ahead and work out the X side first, which will help us determine what Y should be. So we have 5 times -2 is -10. -10 plus 2 is equal to -8. On the other side, we have 4 times a number is equal to -8. Which value here, 3, -2, or -3, could we multiply by 4 and get a -8? If you said -2, you're right. 4 times -2 is -8. So whenever X is -2, Y is also -2. So the correct answer here would be answer choice B. Now we're given an equation graphed on the line, and we're given multiple choices with equations. We have to determine which equation matches the line that is graphed. Now, whenever we did this originally, we started with a set of X and Y values, and then we graphed the line. Now we have a graphed line, and we have to determine which equation matches. How could we determine which equation matches? What do we need? If you said X and Y values, you're right. We need X and Y values just like we had in one of our first examples that we worked. We need at least 2 sets of X and Y values. Where can we get X and Y values from? We're going to look on our graph. So you'll see that when X is 0, Y is 1. You can see that right there where I've highlighted. When X is 0, Y is 1. And we'll need one more point, at least, in order to determine this. I see when x is -1, y is 5. So I'll put when x is -1, y is 5. Now how will we determine which answer choice is correct? We need to substitute the x values and see if we get out the y values. So when x is 0, let's see which equations would give us a +1 for y. Notice, if you multiply anything times 0, you're going to get 0. So where I have -4 times x, I'll get 0. -4 times x, I'll get 0. For x, I'll have 0. And for 2 times x, 2 times 0 will also be 0. So for f, I would get 0 minus 1 is -1. For g, I would get 0 plus 1 is +1. For h, I would get 0 plus 1 is +1. And for j, I would get 0 minus 1 is -1. I should get a +1. So the ones I didn't get a +1 on were f and j. I can eliminate those two answer choices. And now I need to substitute -1 for x. So let's do this with h first. It looks easier. -1 plus 1 is equal to how much? That would be equal to 0. -1 plus 1 is 0. And I should get a +5, so I know it is not answer choice H. I'm not going to automatically pick G. I'm going to verify that I haven't made any mistakes. So I have a -4 times a -1. -4 times -1. A negative times a negative is a positive. And 4 times 1 is 4, so I have 4 plus 1. And that will, in fact, give me 5, so my correct answer here is G. And now we've come to our final example. See if you can do this one on your own. Then check and see if you've done it correctly. Remember, first, we're going to need x and y values. And in order to find x and y values, we'll need to look on the graphed line. So we see that 0, +2 would be 1 point, and another would be 1, -3. Again, 0 is the easiest one to substitute, because 0 times anything is simply 0. So each of these I will have 0 and then minus or plus a number. Would you need to add 2 or take away 2 in order to get 2 for your answer? You would need to add 2. So the 2 that subtract 2 would be wrong. And we'll be left with one of the other answers. So let's check G. -5 times our next x value of 1. -5 times 1 is -5. And -5 plus 2 would give us -3. So we see that answer choice G is the correct answer here.